Muting my microphone.
Hey there, community. Welcome to Hangout of the Avatar. We've got a really special one for you today, one of a new series of fireside chat, so to speak, community roundtables where you, our community, get to hang out live on air with Lord British and talk about some of the features of Shroud of the Avatar. Today we have a great subject, one that a lot of people are really excited about. If you look, we have a full house. Today's hangout is going to be from nature to nutrition, and we'll be getting to that very, very soon. We've got a little bit of business to take care of, so I'll head it over to you. Richard?
First, I better unmute first. But anyway, yes, hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us here on one of our design deep dives and brainstorm sessions. Many thank you again to just you as the community for supporting us. Many thank yous to you for kind of joining us on this as participants in addition to supporters. I think this is going to be something that hopefully you'll find interesting, but I know will be really useful for us too as we're my next trip to Austin, which is a week from Monday. We'll be working on this specifically on entering the data for what we're going to talk to you about today. But before we get started, we've invited a number of our senior community members to join us live. Plus, Gina, I know will be taking questions off the chat room. I've got the chat room up here beside me too, so I can keep half an eye out on it, as I mentioned to some people that I would be doing. But we have a little business that we'd like to do ahead of time that Gina was alluding to. And in particular, I'd like to start that out. Let's see, Winfield has not joined us today. We had a little business with Winfield. I'll actually tell you all what that was. We'll do it in absentia, and I'll catch him in person when I get a chance. At the RTX Expo, Star got a chance to tell him in person, but I have not, so we've not really announced it publicly, that Jerome, who is known to most of you as Winfield, was a recipient of one of our ONBEs, and so I wanted a chance to, on air, do that with him as well. Also, but let me move on, and let's see, is Sean online here? Sean, I'm seeing where if I can find you here.
I believe he's still in traffic.
Still in traffic, okay. Then I will pass on him as well for the moment. But, Ken, I know you're here, so Kenneth Cully, who many of you already have known for many years, not just as a member of this community, meaning the Shroud of the Avatar community, but also has, your contribution to this broad community of gamers, for role-playing gamers, for online role-playing gamers, even more specifically for Ultima gamers, Ultima Online in particular gamers. Your contributions to this community has been extraordinary and durable. It's frankly been astounding. I think the quality and time that you've put into helping everyone enjoy this process of gaming together, so deeply and so well. And even right now with Shroud of the Avatar, not only are you still doing a lot of ties with the community, but you're even branching off, I know, on some new ventures with the community as well that I think are really outstanding. And so if there was somebody for whom that I think recognition is deserving, it would be hard not to keep you on that short list. So we want to keep you on that short list starting right now by making sure we offer you also the chance to receive an ONBE. Oops, I should have grabbed one here. I've got one next to me in a minute. I'll pick one up so I can show it live on screen, but it's a little bit out of arm's reach. But please consider yourself now as one of the knights of the New Britannian Order, and we will get your physical ONBE to you as soon as possible. So congratulations and thank you.
Well, thank you kindly. I'm at a bit of a loss for words. It's been grand doing what I've done with the Codex, with Site before that. I don't know. I was thinking about it the other day. Britannia is... It's like my Narnia, you know? It's the land I'd always hoped to find through the portal at the back of the wardrobe, so to speak. So being able to offer this service to the community has always been a great circumstances. So thank you. This is wonderful.
You are very, very welcome and very, very well received. Pardon me, I'm just going to step up and reach to my left for a few feet here. Hold on, since I left it out of range. But here we go. This is what we will have coming to you as soon as possible. Right here, the nice ONBE medal that also lists that there is an ONBE on the reverse as well. But we have had a small number of these physical medallions made, and as soon as we get a physical address from you, which you can get separately, we'll get this out to you forthwith. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Then one other person that I would like to specifically call out is Jared. Jared, of the man with the great microphone. You know, in addition to your great recording studio, apparently you have set up, you know, you have also become a really pivotal person here, especially in a way that is growing right now very rapidly, and I believe is going to, you know, continue to make really key contributions to this product and this community through the Poet Circle. And you know, I can't tell you how much the Poet Circle broadly and you individually have already meant to this project. You know, with the Poet Circle took a problem and a challenge that honestly I thought was insurmountable about how to work with the community, and not just solved it, but went so far beyond what I thought was possible. I feel so lucky that that you as an individual and the Poet Circle as a group came into existence, has self-organized so well, has such high levels of professional quality. You know, it is, to me, it's the gold standard of community contribution and connection between a crowd-funded, crowd-sourced project team and the community itself. So anyway, phenomenally, you know, pleased and proud to be working with you and be on this journey with you. And so likewise, I would like to make you an ONBE, a Knight of the Realm of New Britannia, and you will also receive a medallion just like this as a small token of our deep appreciation and thanks for everything you've already done.
Well, thank you. I mean, I don't know what to say other than thank you. I've always wanted to. I've said this before, but you know, when I was a kid, I always wanted to work for Lord British because of the effects that those games had on my upbringing as a child. And being able to do that with Poet Circle, you know, and actually contribute music, you know, it really kind of completes that dream of mine, you know, and then to have, you know, recognize me in front of all these people, as long as I don't start crying, I think I'll be okay.
Well, you know, it's really been amazing, and you know, we've had some direct personal exchanges on some of those pieces of music as you've been working on them, and you know, it's phenomenal. And I think you've at least heard the story. Maybe some of the rest of the community hasn't heard the story, but just as a sidebar about music, you know, when we were first looking down the pipe of how we're going to get this music made, you know, we were stuck because we didn't see a way that we were going to frankly be able to afford it. And even if we could afford it, you know, most of the hireable shops that make music don't actually make the music that I would have preferred to have in this game. I look at the earlier Ultimas as having better or more appropriate music in some cases to the later Ultimas, and the later ones were when we went and just hired some composers that in the industry. And as we looked around in the community, we looked around for things we could just buy off websites. We weren't happy with really any of the answers, and it was actually the Poet Circle, you and others at the Poet Circle that got together and said, well, tell us exactly what you're looking for. And I thought, well, that's a pretty fair question. And we sat down and built a detailed, try to be as accurate or detailed as I could about what was or was not what we were looking for. And almost instantly, you guys all went, got it, and sat down. And I think basically everything you all have composed since, asking the right questions and noodling on it, you guys have produced far better music than I think we could have gotten for any price anywhere. Just because you all really get it and you understand the product and you understand what we're looking for, and it's just precisely right for what we're building. So thank you again.
You're welcome. I'm glad to do it. We all are.
Well, then, thank you, and let's move on then into the next topic, for which we've brought everyone else together for. And by the way, for you all who we've for Kenneth and Jared, you're also invited, of course, to this Nature to Nutrition discussion. But you were really invited so we could give you this ONBE. So if you all need to cut out for real life reasons or work or other things, do know that it won't be offended if you cut out for personal reasons. But let's go ahead and then roll on to the second subject. So what we wanted to use this for is to start sharing with the community at large, and you all online get just a little better of a pole position for comments and questions. Then to take you on some deep dives of systems that we've fleshed out fairly well, but are just about to go into implementation, or maybe in their mid-implementation, and it's sort of a chance to show off our work in progress, but also get comments from you all to refine what we're doing before we implement it, because it's of course a lot easier for us to make changes and fine-tunings now than it will be a week or two from now, when or especially a month from now, once we're deep into the putting in all the data for what I'm about to describe. And the one that I've been working on for the last couple months was one of the deeper crafting trees, specifically about cooking. But if you're going to do a crafting tree about cooking, it includes not just the skills of cooking and the recipes of what you would cook with those recipes, but every ingredient you use in that cooking has to come from somewhere. And every tool that you use has to come from somewhere. And every vessel you serve the food in has to come from somewhere. And so and that's going to be true for all the other crafting areas. Each one is going to be deeply tied in with each of the others. And so you really can't do one alone. You really do a bunch. And so Gina, before we started, asked me things like, are we really going to be talking about alchemy today? And I went, well, technically no, this is not the alchemy thing, but you'll see we're going to cover alchemy today, but only because I was forced to at least do some fraction of alchemy in order to really understand its relationship with cooking in general. And so we're actually going to cover a lot of crafting, some of it as deep or deeper than cooking, it will seem. And even the cooking stuff, you see that there's only about 20 cooking recipes in there, because I was only really trying to make sure cooking was fleshed out enough to where anything else you would generally go find a recipe for, or we decide to invent, it will handle, because we've decided kind of what raw ingredients need to be there. And so now I'm going to flip and take my graying visage off of the screen and instead share the Google Doc that the team is literally using. In fact, this morning, when they knew that I was about to present this to you publicly, the team went and dug into it themselves to make sure I wasn't going to say too many things that they would regret me saying publicly before they really knew it as intimately as you're about to know it. And so they just poured through it this morning and gave me the thumbs up. And you'll see, if you're Google Docs users, you'll see one of them, B. Cotton, is actually still in there right now. So we may see him in there changing things as I'm talking about them. But hang on a second. I think I've got the right screen to share. And there it is. So nature to nutrition. So let me first talk to you a little bit about how I started down preparing this document. The motivation for me was the reason why I started with cooking before a lot of the other skill trees is I felt that it was one we needed to do considerably better than most games, including ourselves, have done in the past, and that it was kind of ripe for an innovation round. And that it would kind of set the stage for so many others. And you guys have seen the game already has examples in for almost all the schools of crafting. But in particular for cooking, in most games, including games we've done, cooking or food in general is only useful as basically a healing potion. It's sort of a minor healing potion. If you're injured, you stuff some food in your pie hole and you heal up a little bit. And we said, look, we can do better than that. And one of the challenges for cooking is that on Earth, of course, food is used, well, first of all, to keep you healthy, but the things that you choose to eat have a lot to do with taste and/or the visuals of food. And of course, the two things that you're not going to get very well in a video game compared to the real world is the taste and smell of the food. You might get a little bit of the visuals, but but nothing compared to the presentation you see in the real world. And if all food is really good for is just eating, healing, well, that doesn't mean there's that much motivation to have a very diverse cooking skill. And as I was thinking about food, one of the first things I said is, well, let's make food more interesting. And I began to notice that as I was breaking down food by ingredients. And food generally, if you look at the nutrition labels on food, by mass, about half the mass of most foods is just the water that's in it, and then the rest of the mass of food is fairly equally split up between food that is made out of protein, food that is high in fat, food that is high in carbohydrates, or some mixture thereof. But they're about equal percentages, so it's almost half water, and the remaining half is almost equally split thirds between protein, carbohydrates, and fat if you look at all food in aggregate. And interestingly, not only is that true for all food in aggregate, but that's also what food pyramids on aggregate say you should eat, is about a third of each of those. They vary over time. And then that made me think of, well, wait a minute. When you think of bodybuilders like to eat a lot of protein because protein helps build muscle mass. And I thought, well, that's interesting. What if we tied the protein content of food to your strength or healing rates? And I thought, well, that's at least a place to start. And then I also began to notice that if you think about like 5-hour energies, which are mostly vitamins, or what people do before they go take your test, your SAT test, people often tell you to load carbohydrates because those are relatively fast processing sugars that help your brain operate, and your brain uses lots of calories, as you know, when you're thinking hard. And so what if vitamins and carbohydrates went into your mental capabilities? So it helped your regeneration rates or give you a buff in areas of intelligence or focus. And then for fats, which are often maligned in modern society, you might remember that people eat their eat their fats often for breakfast. Your bacon and eggs often show up at breakfast, and that's to theoretically give you that longer burning energy that lets you proceed through the rest of the day. And so what if we said that having fat on board means that your endurance goes up, so you'll be able to, your speed will stay higher, you won't get tired and worn out, and slow down your combat cycle rates and things of that nature. And so with that as a basis, it seemed first of all that seemed to me as a good basis. It seemed to me that now food, if you do that, food suddenly becomes useful in a much more interesting ways. That way, if you're a fighter, you'll want to load up on protein. If you're a magic user, you'd want to load up on carbohydrates. Anybody that's going to be sustaining combat for a long period of time would want to load up on fats. We then also said, we even this morning with the reading through by Chris Spears and B. Cotton, I had water off on the side, and they said, no, we really need to make sure that we include water so that people don't try to always eat dry food to maximize their energy density. So let's make sure that if you're parched, that overrides your regen rates, and your regen rates drop off. What that then did is that cooking becomes useful. Not only does eating then become useful, but cooking becomes useful in a couple of ways, which is that we're going to make it to where, just like in the real world, when you have a raw ingredient, whether that's a vegetable or meat, those raw materials only have a limited shelf life, maybe a real-time game week. And then by cooking it or preparing it, you can extend its survival time to where, for example, it might last for a real-time month instead of a week. So if you go out and forage in the woods, you would want to then bring it back to a chef to cook into a final product to make sure that its shelf life lasted for players to be able to utilize in an ongoing way. And then to prevent people from overloading, we even do things like make it to where if you overstuffed your stomach, you would eventually throw up. So unless you're the hot dog eating champion, there's a limit to how much you can load into your gullet. So unlike most games where it kind of just is instantly consumed and you get a little bit of minor healing from that apple you ate, and so you just eat more apples and apples and apples until you've healed up, in this case, once your stomach is full, you will throw up if you keep shoving stuff in there, and so you actually need to eat the right kinds of food based upon what you're burning as a player. We then added in things like alcohol, to where if you drink too much alcohol, as in Ultima Online, you'll of course go get a little drunk and dizzy and throw up. And we also added that alcohol into potions. That actually came out of DragonCon. This came up while we were at DragonCon. It was suggested that one way to limit you from just constantly downing healing potions forever is to, first of all, your stomach will fill up, but also if all potions have alcohol in it as part of the base of that mixture, it means that you will be limited as to how many you can drink in a row before, frankly, you'll start getting dizzy and your vision will get screwed up and you'll start stumbling around on the battlefield. So sure, you might not die, but you may not be you may need to retire from combat because you're drunk. Another piece to throw in there is seasonality. We plan on having weather in the game, and I'd already been going public about the amount of time that passes. But somewhere between 3.5 days to a week is going to be one season. 2 weeks to a month will be one game year. But if we have seasonality, the advantage of that is that things like fruit might all the trees might bear fruit in the fall. So fruit will be plentiful to get your vitamins and carbohydrates through fruit in the fall, but you better take it to a chef who can at least cook it into some pies and things for you or whatever it might be to get those ingredients to last through the rest of the game month. So in any case, I think that foundation gives us a pretty good basis of again, protein, fats, and carbohydrates having relevance, as well as needing water to keep you satiated, stability through cooking, alcohol to be drunk. Potions also have alcohol in them, so you're limited by both stomach volume and alcohol. The ingredients showing up seasonally. I think fundamentally that is a strong basis for starting the process of making recipes. So I want to stop here for a couple of, if anybody has any comments or questions about that foundation, before I then move in and kind of start showing you how things fall out if you start with a basis of that kind. So anybody first of all, in the room, anybody in the chat room first, and then if Gina, if you can think if there's any appropriate comments or questions of just that foundation from the chat room after that. But Violation, I think you were going to say something.
Yes, you had actually mentioned something about the overall capacity that you could eat being a multiple of what you would need to be able to sustain your gameplay. And one of the concerns many people have had is how much of an impact this mini game will have on the total game, if that makes sense. And I was hoping you could maybe, I didn't hear you explain that in the design docs, that multiple, and I was hoping maybe you could touch base on that, or table it if it's on a future page.
No, that's actually a great segue right there to the same part. And I should have done that in the first part, but it's perfectly good right now. Let me go back and share this screen again. So once I kind of came up with that as a general idea, I then had to sit back and say, okay, well, how does this start to shake out? And so I made this kind of case studies page and kind of pumped a few actual numbers into this just to see what it would look like. And first of all, I thought since the game time goes faster than real time, obviously. We have the sun rise and set in about an hour, and we think we're going to stick with an hour, but the longest we'd probably ever consider is 2 hours. But so a game day is most likely to stay an hour. In theory, it could stretch out to be 2 hours. But you don't want to eat 3 meals in an hour. So the first thing we said is, look, 1 meal a day is enough. So whatever we scale these numbers to ought to be encouraging you to eat 1 meal per day at most. We also said, some people only want to eat once a day. And so while we're going to drain your stomach at once per day, kind of whatever the rate of 1 unit per day, we thought we would let you overeat up to 5 days worth, effectively, before you would vomit, so you could never load up more than 5 days in advance worth of material in your stomach, but it will still always decay or drain out at effectively 1 meal's worth, 1 day's worth per day. And that way, if you want to constantly stay topped up, you just eat once a day, but you can always kind of overload and then skip a few days, which means really a few game hours. Is sort of the way that was going to shake out. So those don't worry about those numbers that are in there, by the way. Those were Richard's test numbers. B and Chris are going to do their own nomenclature and scalars for numbers. It was just a demonstration to them about what the scale would be. But the result of that is this. Oopsie, there we go. Moving lines, not like I meant to. Oh, shucks, I came back to the top of the page. Sorry, hang on, let me go find my way back down to where I was. Oh, there it went. The goal here was to say that, a nominal person would eat the same amount of protein and carbs and fat. You need considerably more water with that, but by the way, half the mass of most objects is water. Will give you an allowance of a similar amount of alcohol, and will give you 10 times that amount, or 5 days worth of that amount on average for before you're too full. And that again is just an approximation. But if you look down here on the what a healthy meal has in it, I then went through and wrote examples. So by the way, I literally broke it down. And the nice thing, by the way, of using protein, fat, and carbs is that this information is actual information from actual food that's on the web. So I'm as a basis using the real data that is of real food. So if you ever go, oh, what do we put in? What numbers do we put in for a slice of apple pie? Well, just Google it and there's the data. But I then sat down and said, well, what is the actual amount of scale? Like if I say if a meal starts with a piece of steak and some potato and spinach and bread and ale and cheese, well, what does that add up to as a sum? And I actually built out a whole bunch of meals, including high protein things, and I did this test pass of all different kinds of either meals or parts of meals to add them up, compare them to different trees to see what that scale should be, so that when I came in here and put these numbers 500 in, they appeared to be approximately correct for 1 meal per day that would actually match data that we could then import directly from the internet as to what the majority of the values were for the grams of protein, fat, and carbs and water in things that you could use as ingredients and in things you could use as meals. So, Violation, did I answer that question? Okay. And anybody else here in the Hangout have a question or a comment on the basis? Yeah, go ahead, Ria.
Yeah, I like the depth of the whole concept, but I get a red flag on when I hear vomiting, because I always remember the scene Oktoberfest and World of Warcraft, and everyone was puking and everybody. It's really, I can't really put it in words. So
So you're worried about the grossness of the vomiting. And
Yeah.
and while actually, I have this. Star always counsels us to not have two rose-colored glasses when we remember finally things that happened at the beginning of Ultima Online. And I remember people protesting in Lord Bruce's castle by getting drunk and naked and vomiting on the floor and screaming obscenities that the filter had a hard time blocking. And I thought it was cool, but that was cool in one case, not in people vomiting all the time on accident or purpose. But what we're going to do in this
Right.
too is if you vomit and lose the food, you lose all the health benefits. So all these buffs that were coming from having so nicely metered your food intake will go away instantaneously. So you'll actually not want to reach that level. We just want to stop you from infinitely piling on things on top. So that's why we want that mechanic there. But we're going to make that mechanic not only visually gross, which you might not like, but also costly to you from a gameplay standpoint. So I don't think you're going to see people standing around doing it. They'll run into it on accident maybe the first time, although they'll be warned. They'll be saying, "Oh, I'm full. Boy, I don't feel good. I shouldn't eat anything else." You'll get warnings as you approach these limits. But we think it's important that if you exceed the limit, you throw away the value that you've earned on the journey there.
It would also be good to add a timeout that you can't eat the next hour or something like that. So it can't do repeat and repeat and repeat.
That's actually a good idea. That not only stops you from that prevents the grossness of repeating, but it's also a nice a very painful cost.
Yeah, that's
overeating. That's a great idea.
Realistically, after you've had a really serious vomiting session, you normally don't really want to eat right away.
Yep, I agree. That's cool. Excellent idea. Thank you, Rhea. Anybody else have a comment here before we go on to some actual examples?
Caleb actually has a question.
Go ahead.
Fairly simple, but we talked about preparing different foods so they last longer. What about storing foods, like canning or some sort of function like that to make food last longer? Is that something that'll be implemented or you're thinking about?
Yes. In fact, I had specifically. I don't think I'm making a note about it here because I don't think there's any recipes in there right now. But I was thinking about that as I did this because I tried to both put in the gamified short versus long duration of foods, but I also tried to make sure that I didn't go radically against expectation in the sense of things like maple syrup, which you'll see in there, maple from a maple tree is, including making of the maple tap, etc., and the seasonal availability is in there. But maple is pretty stable. So unlike most raw materials, which last only a month, maple lasts a long time. Similarly, as you probably know with honey is something that even at room temperature has a natural antibiotic in it, and it will not spoil for very long periods of time. In fact, would make a good wound dressing. Oh, in fact, let me make a note of that. I don't know if you know that honey used to be used for its antibiotic properties, and so it might be good to put in some healing kinds of things because it does have those antibiotic properties. But that's also why it's shelf stable at room temperature, is because of that property that the bees evolved for it, since they needed to survive in their honeycombs at room temperature. But yes, canning to create longevity was intended in it, which is sort of a little bit out of order. But I would even wanted to mention one thing there too, which is on wine and spirits, both of which are in the game. I wanted to make wine and spirits interesting, but of course, we're not going to make 15 brands of wine that taste different than each other, or frankly have any real different game effect. It's water and alcohol for all practical purposes. But at least most people who are into whiskeys or wines like to also say things like, well, yes, I have this 15-year Scotch whiskey that I've had in my cellar for the last 15 years, so it's literally a 15-year-old Scotch whiskey. And in the real world, I've actually been reading some reports of late that say aging actually doesn't, from a scientific standpoint, make that much big of a difference in the taste of whiskey, or at least in the quality and dollar value of whiskey. It makes a real difference in the price. And all of us, including myself, like to claim that this well-aged one must be better than the ones that aren't. But I still thought aging whiskeys or spirits was a fun thing to do. So there are recipes that you'll see in here that are about, make a cask of whiskey and say that I want this to be 15-year whiskey. So once you set it down, the timer is going to go for 15 game years. Fortunately, game years. It'll go by faster than real years. But the point is, we'll be able to make a recipe that is ever many game years as we want. And when you've set that whiskey down, it will not be openable for that many real game years. So when somebody comes to you and says, I have a 20-year bottle of whiskey or a cask of whiskey, it will literally have been there laid down after being crafted for 20 game years. And I thought that'd be a way to add fun, because there's not really going to be any technical difference between the two whiskeys, but it really will be whiskey that took 20 years to make.
So I have a question actually that ties to that. Came into the Shroud of the Avatar site. Sockeye Salmon wants to know if he will be able to brand his own food and drink. So let's say he wants to make a rare batch of ale or a signature bread from his bakery. Is there a way that food will be labeled like other craftables that we've talked
Excellent question.
about?
Yeah, excellent question about finished goods labeling. And so here's probably how that will occur. So there's going to be a good and bad part of that. So the question comes in when you need to stack items. As a general rule, the general rule of thumb is commodities that come out of foraging or refining remain commodities. They stack, and so they won't have a maker's mark associated with it. The finished goods that, generally speaking, don't stack will all have maker's marks. And so if I make a sword, it's the steel it came from didn't have a maker's mark. The boards that were cut to make the handle wouldn't have a maker's mark. But the finished sword has a maker's mark, and that should be with it forever. Bought or sold or lost or found in treasure with monsters or recycled, and however it gets back into the system, the maker's mark, as well as anything that has been through combats, if it's killed 100 orcs or whatever it might be, that will be a part of its permanent history. I hadn't thought about this with food, but here's what I think. I mean, and I'm speculating out loud because I literally hadn't thought of this when we were creating this document.
Don't learn.
But what should happen is anything that remains a non-commodity will probably be able to have that maker's mark associated with it. So an apple pie made by Fire Lotus will probably say an apple pie made by Fire Lotus. It probably would have that on it. However, once you cut that pie up and put it on plates to serve, it might turn into a commodity. There's times where things will return into a commodity. When you pour a bottle of wine into glasses to serve it, it will probably the tags of that finished good will probably disappear. So when you are sipping on the wine, you'll have to remember that this was a particular something. But up until you break it up into commodity pieces again, it should be able to retain those values. So I don't know when that breakup's going to happen. Actually, the example I gave of wine might be transcended, because glasses of wine are not going to stack into multiples that make a stack of wine glasses of this is a stack of 10 glasses of wine. And so it might even be able to survive that transition. But that's the nature of the transition that would or would not be able to hold it. So we'll explore that. Great catch. But something like that should work.
I'd actually like to ask one question. During Release 8, I was actually there when you were talking to a few of us about some generic ideas along this, and you mentioned something about whether you cook something on a campfire versus cooking it in like a furnace and getting a much more thorough cook and having the effects of that. So if you could maybe see if you've come up with more ideas along those lines, depending on where you cook them, and having the advantage of actually bringing it home to cook.
Right, so that came up in that in live in-game, and sadly, no, I haven't thought about it really any further than that. It hasn't come up again, but it is a good point that I will now make better notes here for, and I'll describe to everybody what that issue was. The question was for cooking on campfires, and in particular, if people want to set up camp out on a map, which is a fun thing to do. We've got tents, we've got bedrolls, we've got campfires. There ought to be a way to cook right there in front of it versus having to set up an entire cooking station. And while I agree with that in principle, and so it would be fun to think of, maybe you have a flag that says these recipes are cookable on the minor cooking stove, the grill you put over the campfire, whatever it might be. That should be able to be doable in theory. To have a level 0 cooking station, which is this the grate you put over your campfire. But exactly how that would work, we haven't thought through. It might be possible all recipes are done that way, and just to a lesser effect, because we do have, for all the other crafting stations, we do have the apprentice stations and journeyman stations and master stations to make some of the more complicated things more successfully on the bigger ones of. And so it should feather into that system nicely, but we haven't done the work to see how exactly it would feather in.
So I have actually another system-based question. Before I do that, I wanted to mention a couple names here. The canning question originally had come from Ronan, and also the idea about potions working with an alcoholic attribute. At DragonCon, when that was brought up, Adiun was the first one. Adiun, forgive me if I'm saying your name wrong, but he was the first one to recommend that, and I love giving people credit for their ideas. So on that note, Mel had a question that I really wanted to hear answered, because it's another one of those core functionalities. The order that you eat your food, so the order of consuming, will it have a different influence? And his example he gave was drinking alcohol on an empty stomach. So has there been any thought to that?
Interesting proposition. The current answer is no. The current expectation, and by the way, the guys haven't even started the implementation. That's what they're going to be doing, next week. But what I put into this document, at least, is that once you eat something, it instantaneously breaks up into how much protein have I just added to my protein value, how much carb value, how much fat value, how much water value, how much alcohol value was just added. And those counters just will move, those numerical counters will move up, and then over time they drain back down towards 0. And as long as they're over 100%, then you're going to get the buffs that we believe are appropriate for being satiated in those ways. And if they go below 100, then your buffs start to diminish or go away. And if your water is one of those that goes below, even all your auto healing and other things go away. Is the current thinking. So order wouldn't matter in the current implementation. That would actually be, obviously anything's possible. I get the question, but that would be a measurable amount of additional work for not that big a change, I don't think. So I wouldn't recommend it. Could be done, wouldn't. I don't think we'll do it. Okay, well, let's jump in. Unless somebody else here has a systems question, I'll go into the next level down.
I actually do. It's brought up by a couple people. Digris was part of it, and another person in the room. I can't remember your name. I'm sorry. You had mentioned earlier that the food would go down 1 day at a time. You could stock up 5. It would go down 1 at a time. Now, if this is a two-part question. First, if you're not online and you have food in it, is it still going to deteriorate? Or are you going to lose your food level? And if you don't eat, will you end up getting hurt, dying, for example?
Yeah, excellent question. My answer in my making up answers in real time would say the following: that the shelf life of food is tied to game time. So if I own an apple and I've been offline for a month, when I log back in, my apples will have spoiled. So whether they're in my inventory or wherever they are, if it's fresh, uncooked parts, well, even the cooked parts still have a half-life that will cause them to go away over time. In real time. For you, what's in your stomach, I believe we'll run that on being logged in time, so that if you have exited New Britannia and are living in the real world, therefore your avatar in Britannia is not processing that mash that is in your stomach. So that would be my anticipated way to go. Interesting question. Haven't discussed it with the team. I will make a note of it so that belly processing while offline. That's a way. If you have an apple that's going to spoil and you're about to log off for a week, quick, eat it, because it won't spoil in your stomach as fast. Would be the way I think it's going to shake out. Okay. Any other? Go ahead.
One more thing, maybe I'll toss out on that. That's an idea going with that. Is what happens if you don't eat or drink a specific thing. It could maybe be reverse effects, where if you don't eat any, carbohydrates, then you actually not only do you, if you don't eat them for a length of time, then you actually lose like a cap or something. Your cap starts to go down or something along those lines.
Or scurvy. We could, if we thought of diseases, like there's, what is gout from eating too much fat, or do we ever really, was that ever determined? I remember that used to be something about drinking too much wine or eating too much fat or something.
I think you put vitamin deficiency, so probably would come from eating too much of one kind of food.
Yeah, and so and well, I know that for example, scurvy was lack of vitamin C, but we're not going to track vitamins. We're only tracking 3 things or 4 if you include water is already way more than other games have done, and it's borderline too complicated already. And so I wouldn't want to track anything else. We'd want to think of a disease or something that might come from these precisely a overabundance or an underabundance of these exact ones. By the way, nobody asked, but on this time, but it has come up on the team. I think it even came up at DragonCon if I constantly stay at a state of overeating, will that affect my character? Will my character gain weight? And what's interesting about that is that if you've seen the character creation window get bigger and bigger, all the customizations you can do on your face now as we try to make that as elaborate as possible. Well, we don't currently have a bone in your belly, but I think we could. And so I think it would be humorous at the very least if we made it to where if you stay packed to 5 days worth of food constantly day in day out, that maybe you get a little paunch going on there. And don't forget, because all the articles of clothing you wear already scale to your body. You can make your whole avatar bigger or smaller. Everything scales with you. It scales with each bone. So if we give you broad shoulders, the armor would scale to those same broad shoulders. So we could get away with scaling a piece or two of your body based upon over or under nourishment. I'll make a note about that so that because I don't think it's in the doc.
Be a good way to recustomize your character. While you're making that note, I'll throw this other one out from Mel that I just saw pop up. He's wondering if there will be mushrooms like you ate that will make the screen all colorful and stuff.
And stuff, yes. And so back to here. Well, let's dive in. That's a good segue to I see our time burning away here, so I would like to take you guys through this list of example recipes, just so you'll understand it. And let me do a share screen here again. And let me go to the top of this. Now, what you're going to see here is I'm going to start you at the top of this document, and this document is in order of first the hunting, gathering, and foraging and harvesting skills. So that first letter of a round of acquisition of ingredients. Then there's the block of the skills for refining. Then there's the block of skills for finished goods, including cooking. But how I built this document is I started with saying, okay, suppose I want an apple pie. Well, that means I need apples, and I need to be able to make dough, which means I need flour. And if I need flour, that means I need a grain like wheat. And boy, if I need wheat, then I need some. I guess the wheat itself is also the seed you need to plant. So that's loops. But with the apple, that means that when are you going to get the apple seeds exactly? When you eat an apple, do you also spit out the seeds nominally, or do they show up in your inventory? I had to go through and think about literally, with no exceptions, where do each part and piece come from? And so it's sort of a circular design process. And then we also had to decide things like how many is enough? How many different kinds of fruit do you need before, sure, I could make pears and persimmons, but is it really important to have yet another? Because what that then feeds into is, do you need a recipe which is really a fruit pie recipe that can then have any fruit plugged in, or do you need an individual recipe for every type of fruit pie that exists? And both those are possible, but have different kind of complexity problems that fall out, especially when ingredients, in theory, you can say, well, gee, if I have a fruit pie recipe, can I use berries in it? in which case, it becomes incredibly complex very quickly. And so a decision that I made, by the way, I first started making there to be, I started down the path like I just described it, where a fruit pie recipe was one recipe with fruits and berries could all be used in that recipe and it would be successful. After a while, actually, it became too complicated because of the potential multiple interpretations of some of those ingredients. So I actually scrapped that, and I went back to one recipe per ingredient per result. And so if I want an apple pie recipe versus a peach pie recipe, they are different recipes. And if I want a blueberry pie recipe, somebody has to write it. And we can easily add them. Recipes are cheap and easy. But there is an individual recipe for every use of everything. And I can't remember if Amber says pumpkins. I think there are. We'll see here in a minute if there's pumpkins in here. I hope so, because I love pumpkin pie. We'll see. And if not, we'll get it back. But if you notice, there's some things in blue in this document. These the words that are highlighted in blue are highlighted in blue because I believe that I've cross-referenced that all the way through the document to where all of its outputs exist and all of its inputs exist, I think. And things that are in red are kind of ideas that may or may not actually go in, but we'll see. And so, for example, starting right here at the top, the miners, salt is going to be important. We're not going to dry out seawater to get salt, and so instead the miners will mine it out of blocks of salt. You'll also see clay. The reason why clay showed up in here is because, don't forget, every weapon and every tool is made by players. And so if you're going to make a pair of pliers from scratch, you might need the mold to cast iron into to make a pair of pliers. And the way you're going to make that mold is by casting an existing pair of pliers in clay to make a ceramic mold that you can pour the iron into to get the raw base of a pair of pliers that you might, or scissors you might need for cooking. The reason why this one says future is, at least it's brought up the subject of, can we take blocks of granite to build a wishing well out of, a water well? But since that really wasn't cooking, I thought I'll come back to it later. I then had to include, all the ingredients that are really reagents that go into magic also show up, many of them here, because some of them can be used for cooking. Garlic is both, and so all the reagents showed up in here, like sulfurous ash. All the magic gems, I think, showed up only because I was happy to be talking about mining. I don't think any of those are used in cooking. But then if you go over to forestry, I had to say, well, how many kinds of fish am I going to build recipes for? And again, I originally had like 8 kinds of fish until I went to, no, there's going to be an individual recipe for each kind of fish. So I settled currently on just trout and salmon and bass. And you've already seen the schools of fish under the water, and we're going to allow these schools of fish to be places where your probability is maximized for catching those fish. And they can be fished out, and they can be seasonal. And what we're going to do with fish, even though fish stack, in other words, if I make a stack of 10 fish of salmon, right now they actually do stack on top of each other. Then we may change that. We don't necessarily have to. But we also are going to make them vary percentage by their size. So their probability of being caught will be seasonal, and the probability of a certain size will be seasonal. And that way we can have daily, monthly, or yearly fishing contests that tell you how big a salmon you caught. But if they become a commodity, then they become a generic salmon, and they cut up to steaks that are the same volume of meat as any other one of their species. I talked about maple and maple taps, and you can see, like over here, to get it, you can see that it requires a maple tap and a flask and a hammer. And I had to make sure that means we need to be able to make glass flasks, and the blacksmith's got to be able to make that maple tap, and the blacksmith's got to be able to make that hammer. From there, you go over into things like honey that you're going to be able to get from beehives, and of course put the note in here that means the beehive needs to attract bears and bees to harass the player. We've got cinnamon in here as a flavoring agent. Now we're going to get over to I don't see our maybe we'll look down. I'm cheating. I'm seeing ahead of you have pumpkins, but for fruit, settled on 3: apples, grapes, strawberries. for vegetables have a fairly long list. And the reason why I ended up with more vegetables, not only are they common in lots of cooking, but a lot of these became dyes, because as soon as they're doing cooking, that of course spilled over into tanning and dyeing of clothing, and I needed to find some various ones of certain colors to make sure that I had dye ingredients to make all the colors people might want to make. I then went into grains, and at first I had rice in there too, and I may add rice back to be able to make sake and that sort of thing. But at least at the moment, there's wheat and corn. Then I only one kind of nut, pecans in this case. I know it must be some people might prefer others, but at least have one to begin with. And then these special things of beans, barks, leaves, and trees. They come from trees, the maple tree, cinnamon tree, sugarcane plants, coconuts. And then, generally speaking, herbs, peppers, garlic, ginger, mustard, and vanilla. For the fishing, and this was kind of the fun part. One of the fun things going through this was to do things like, for fishing, if we have live bait. Well, and we have to plant in the game. We're going to use actual planting beds that you go put the seeds in. You don't just walk around the grass and set it down wherever you want. You actually set down on the ground a planting bed, which is an object that you can buy. And so if those planting beds get rained on, I don't know about you guys, but every time I see worms, it's when it's been raining and the worms come up to the surface to get air. So if you want to go get your live bait, you wait for it to rain, and then you go around to tilled planting beds that don't have plants growing in them, and that's where you get your worms from. And so again, it makes this kind of seasonal rhythm, or in this case, a weather rhythm of activity that I think will be kind of fun. And of course, I put cotton in here because it fits in. It's not something you eat, but it kind of fit in that same cycle of ingredients. So that was sort of planting them, but then you similarly had to be able to forage them. The apple tree makes apples, the onion plant makes onions, the grains make the grain, and of course you had to get some seeds. That was the time I chose to give you some seeds as output. Then I went into field dressing. And a big quandary I had with field dressing is that at first, when you broke up a carcass of a cow, well, actually, I had two steps. The field dressing was just to go from the dead cow to having the bovine carcass, and later there's a butchery step. And at first, I had the butchery step where you get shoulder and flank and brisket and ham hocks and all. You got every single solitary individual piece. And lots of recipes call for various parts and pieces, but I found at that point that, again, it ballooned into being too large a set of ingredients. And so you'll see when I get down to butchery that we kept it much more simple than that. All carcasses kind of break down into chunks of meat and a few other special ingredients like bones and sinew and things that could be used by other crafting areas. You'll also see in here corpse wax. Undead creatures give off corpse wax, and while you may not want to eat, corpse wax is a real substance, by the way, that comes on corpses that lay around for a while, and it's used in some of the potions and things, and even I'm going to tell you a story about one of our lords of the manor and corpse wax here in a minute, and his personal family history, and Peter McGowan, which I'll go back to in a minute. Then I had to get into the tools. So here's all the ways to, if you want to make a field knife blank, you have to use a field knife mold that you made with the clay, and put in an ingot of that should say an iron ingot, and melt it down into those tools. So the smelter not only refines all the things that need to be smelting, but also casts the blanks of a lot of the tools that might need some finishing by the blacksmith. It includes all the ceramic molds. So here's all the molds that you would need to cast all the blanks for tools and also swords and some of the other things. Then I also said the smelter is the one who's going to melt down quartz and silica to make glass objects. So here you can see the drinking glasses. And the way I figured out the process of probably the hardest one to do is fluids in containers. Can a vessel that holds fluids literally hold any type of fluid, in which case you have to create a new structure that says the glass has an object in it, and what's the object in it that are distinct from each other. And versus add that level of complexity, I basically just said all things that are known as goblets, whether they are made out of glass or wood or ceramic or metal, they all hold wine. All things that are mugs, no matter what they're made out of, hold beer, all etc. That way, I could minimize the the number of iterations that were spawned. So drink your wine out of goblets, drink your beer out of mugs. But the smelter makes glass, and the smelter also he's the guy with the fiery oven to make ceramic. So even ceramic goblets, mugs, and jugs, he's the guy that makes it. Then the milling came in because you've got to make some handles for your tools, often out of wood. So a bunch of stuff came into milling. Some stuff came into textiles, just because again these trees will be way more fleshed out. But again, it starts with at least a few pieces and parts that I needed or came out of parts you got out of food. The tanner in general is doing dyeing and leather and stuff, but I let him come in here to the tanner might be able to make the beef jerky, hanging up on his rack there to tan some, to dry out some meat. And I also gave him, at least at the moment, the ability to make some dried fruit or raisins, or take our sugar cane and dry out some sugar, so to speak, in his kind of way that he does tanning. So I even gave a little cooking to the tanner, and we could move that off there if that didn't seem appropriate. Then here we get down to the butchery that I was talking about, where you break down a trout into fillets, you break down cows into pieces of bovine meat, you break down sheep into mutton meat, etc. And you always get a little bit of fat and bones out of those breakdown process. We even have oysters and pearls that kick in. There's I put in the coconuts because we already have the 2 empty halves of coconuts you bang around while you're running around the game, so I need to have coconuts as a source, so there's your source of coconuts. And then finally we get into the final products, where the blacksmith can make parts for fishing, like your fish hook, that maple tap, the food press, grinders to be able to grind food, field knives to do your field dressing, all the other things to hunt or gather with, machete that you need even for like getting some of the bark off of cinnamon, a crumbing knife, which I think is the knife for making the barrels you need to age your whiskey and wine, all the other kind of tools you need kind of run through here now. You need things like an iron wheel. If you're going to make a food press, you got to have a wheel to turn. Pliers and dividers. Here's your vats for the dyeing. For the tanners and dyers need the vats. I think there's a couple other places we needed the vats. Tools you would need, wood and plane. If you're gonna have a milk can. Oh, this brought up a funny one too that's going through the team right now from the artist standpoint. I had to go, well, where are you going to get your milk? Of course, you get your milk from cows. But that means we needed 2 states of cow. Right? If you think of plants, you have the grown plant or the cotton plant with the cotton buds on it, or the cotton plant without the cotton buds on it. So I recently put in the request through the art team to give me the engorged cow, separate from the non-engorged cow, so that when you walk up with your milk can to an engorged cow, you can get your can of milk and create a non-engorged cow. The carpenter can make the fishing pole. He makes all the barrels and casks that you use to age all your wine. Some wooden spoons and things you might need. Butter churns, because you can get butter as an ingredient, so you're going to have a butter churn. Then you get over to the tailor and the alchemist, and again, these are in red because this was not my goal to do this. Here's the comment about don't forget to put the grain alcohol in potions to limit their use. That came out of DragonCon. But as an idea, that healing potion, here's some corpse wax that might go in there. Heck, I might right now in real time put in some honey because it has some antibiotic properties. So let's stick honey in there too. But I'll come back to alchemy obviously when I go do that tree. And then finally, at long last, we actually get, after all that, we actually get to cooking. And again, these were only meant to be examples, enough to make sure that we could go on and add in more ingredients or more recipes on request. So, if anybody has some fun personal family recipes, send them to Gina or me, and we'll see what we can do by getting a few of them in there if they seem fun. You have to get your even the chef will do some processing of using that food grinder to make flour. Excuse me. And the red one's there about making your worts and mashes for beer or whiskey. Working on everything in here, including all the way down to peanut butter, because we have peanuts in there. Making your yeast cultures from scratch. There's your barrel of wine that you can have over a period of time. Here, this brings up another interesting thing. Because fluids were the hardest, the most convenient for a player way to pour wine out of a wine bottle into glasses would be to walk over to the table and pour wine out of the bottle into each glass, and ta-da, you're done. And the bottle might know that it has 3/3, 2/3, 1/3, or 0/3 of wine left in it before it becomes empty. I realize that is the most convenient from a player standpoint, but that means writing a whole other interaction system. This whole system of the bottle has to remember how many fractions it has in it, and similarly with glasses. And so what I've done is I've basically said breaking up casks into bottles or bottles into glasses is also done as a recipe. So when you empty a bottle of wine, it becomes 4 glasses of wine on the spot. And so you need to run that recipe, you need 4 empty goblets and 1 full bottle. And when you then run the recipe, the bottle becomes empty and the goblets become full. And so that way it all fits into the same system. It's a little weird from a player standpoint, but I thought it was a good sacrifice to keep everything working in the same structure so we didn't have to write more code, at least in the short term. We could always add a more direct way later, but it's a foundational piece. And then here's tons of cooking recipes, pies, vegetable stock, other things. I'm gonna zoom down to a couple of fun ones here, like Don Dupre's duck stew. For those of you who are old Ultimate people, you'll get that joke. And here's the other one here I wanted to mention from our Lord of the Manor, Peter McCohen. His family history in Scotland, literally up until a few generations ago, believed in regicide, reg as in regal. Their family believed that the way you pass down lineage of command of the territories from one generation to the next was the younger generation had to kill off the older generation. And the point of that is that it also always meant you had a young and virile new generation to be in control. And so by the time the guy was old and feeble, guy or gal was old and feeble, somebody younger would knock him off. So that's how you became the next heir to the throne, was by knocking off your parent. And which I think is just funny. So his NPCs and characters in the game are going to be related to this regicide issue. But he also noted that one of his favorite foods, or one of the classic foods in his region of Scotland, was something called a stovey, a type of food I had previously not been aware of. But because his family history included this recipe stovey, I decided to have a regicide stovey, under the assumption that the way you got a lot of the parts that went into it was by cooking your ancestor that you just recently overthrew. And so it includes not only the mutton and pork and kind of standard ingredients that stovies apparently have in them, but you'll see down here the corpse wax. And so something you can only get off of an undead creature that you've killed. So that's why corpse wax was up there much earlier, is because in addition to the alchemist's use for corpse wax, there's one legitimate cooking recipe that that uses corpse wax. And I think that's close to all I need to give you as an outline. It does. So the last thing in there was the actual cooking recipes. And the point of these was, again, to just be samples. If you want garlic cheese bread, you need the flour and the cheese and the butter, onion, salt, pepper, oil, and garlic. And you got to build it. You cook it in an iron baking pan that the blacksmith made for you. And that will take those raw ingredients that might have only survived for a short time, and it'll make them last 6 game months. And by the way, 6 game months is only about a real-time week. So that one actually didn't, bread, I've assumed, did not add a huge amount of time for its longevity. But that's at least a sampling of some actual recipes and the process of breaking that down into all the tools and supplies. I don't expect that to be perfect. I'm sure there's errors in it. But the thing that would be great to get from you all today is just, what do you think of broadly of that level of detail? Have I gone way overboard in some areas or way underboard in some areas, or do you think we're close? John?
I actually, I think it's awesome, and it is more in depth than I've definitely ever put into food. A couple quick questions that did come up too, though, that I think need to be asked. Two of them came from Jupiter 13. First one being, how do you deal with stacking ingredients of different states of decay?
Excellent. So interestingly, when I wrote this up, I actually assumed we'd give things a half-life, which really was meant to be, if the half-life of an apple was a week, you would just sort of lose out of your apple stacks, the decay rate of a subatomic part of a radioactive particle. They would just kind of randomly decay. The team actually was not happy with that. They said, that's not cool. That means you could actually lose things too soon that you just got. In theory, it could randomly decay instantaneously, and that would be really frustrating. And so Chris Spears at the moment has said that what they think they'll be able to do, I can't remember if it's B or Chris, anyway, one of them said, they will actually keep every ingredient, every piece will know when it was made, and even though they stack, they're going to display as a stack for you as convenience, but internally they're actually going to be separate entries, so that each apple will know its age, and when you consume them, you'll always consume the oldest one, so that so everything else will still have its maximum decay time available, and if it's already decayed away, it's gone obviously for you, so you won't get it anyway. And the only reason that you might need some more granularity is we've at least been talking about, should there be a chance that the recipes go badly for using kind of spoiled ingredients in them? Do we want them to become poisonous or other things? In which case, I might want to use my freshest apples versus my oldest apples. But we haven't really wrestled that one together yet. But broadly, we think the answer is probably to not actually stack them, only stack them on display.
One other question that the same person asked for Jupiter 13 was, could poor house cleaning result in rodents and other vermin, which then get into our food supply and ruin crafting and deplete its quality? That could also go into the camping thing and where you store them, like actually having to store them in a safe container or something like that.
I think that it's hilariously fun. I think that would take a fair bit of code to pull that off well, and so I don't think that would be an episode 1 target that we could sign up for. But I've already made a note of it. I think it's a great idea, and if we can find a way to, reach into that over time, I think that'd be hilarious.
One more, and then I can stop hogging it. You're talking about, for example, a wine glass could pour into 4, or a wine bottle could pour in 4 glasses. I don't know anything about coding whatsoever, but would it be any problem to say, if you only had 3 glasses on you, pour it in those 3, and the rest is gone? It's your choice. That way, you can use partial and get rid of the rest if you wanted to.
At the moment, I would say no, and only because I think I don't think that will be the critical block that holds you. I think that most of these commodity-type objects will be plentiful, so I don't think it'd be stopped, and it would mean we'd have to change the code to accommodate that, and it's just simpler. A recipe, in fact, I didn't say this up front, but I think it's self-evident to most people. A recipe basically has a name. It has what its outputs are, and sometimes its outputs are more than one thing. If you, for example, if the recipe is pour a bottle of wine into 4 wine glasses, its input is 4 empty wine glasses and 1 full bottle of wine. Its outputs are 1 empty bottle and 4 full glasses of wine. So after the name, then the outputs. Then all the tools that are used but don't go away, like the spatula or meat grinder, and most of the tools that get used take wear, and so they will eventually wear out, need to be repaired. You have to go back to the blacksmith and have him invoke his recipe of repair on that tool. And then there's the consumed ingredients, and those are ingredients that literally 100% go completely away. And that's the baseline, and as long as we put everything through that, it's easy for us to put the data in and make this game work. there are enhancements we already plan even in episode 1. Like one is, as opposed to just fire and forget every recipe, we want it to be that the recipes can go wrong. And so imagine as a chef, you might be making dough, and the batter's too thin or too thick. Well, what do you do at that point if it's too thick? Do you just add some water? But it really, you don't exactly know why it's too thin or too thick. The water may not be what it really needs. So you get the chance to correct by burning another ingredient or two, which might bring it back on track, or might still cause the recipe to go foul and fail, and so or make it worse. And so we want to make some interim steps just so they're not just all fire and forget, that you have to just make some decisions even through the crafting process. But as a general rule, we still want to pipe them as much as possible through this structure. Anybody else got one here from the group?
Yeah. I have two questions. One is, when I hear the whole thing with the bottle wine and glasses, I think of the rate we can go out and explore the world. You have to lift everything. So is there also a variation of it to go out, take wine out or something like that? Is that also planned? So we don't have to take the whole dinner table with us.
Oh, you mean like out on an adventure?
Yeah.
You have a good point. I hadn't thought about the camping situation and saying, hey, we want to share some of the wine right here while we are camping. And so at the moment, what would be required, based on the way I see it here so far, is everyone has their mug with them. One person has the cask of beer lugged on their back, and we say, let's have a nice round of beer. Everybody hand me your mugs. Then I invoke the recipe of break down the mug, take down the cask of beer into the mugs that I have, and then I hand everybody their mugs back. That's the way it would work right now. But you bring up an interesting point. I'm gonna make a note about it, and I'll think about if there's a way to streamline that a little better.
So
and you can right out of it, for the wineskin kind of thing.
Yeah. Second question comes from my experience of World of Warcraft. In the end, you have one big recipe which gives you the best buff and everything. So the question is, how do we avoid this situation in Sota, that we have one combination of recipes or foods that make the shortest way to get all buffs, and everyone is only eating this?
Yes, we're definitely working on that too. And what's interesting is, let me go back to the end of my recipe list. I put in my lesson because I knew that people would be motivated to try to do that. I tried to invent it myself to see what happened with it. And so, for example, let me do my share screen here again. You'll see here I have my elven bread, my limbus bread, or classic D&D dungeon rations. Oh, and I also have the Britbane bread here, the poisonous bread to feed Lord British. But if you imagine elven bread or dungeon rations, or when I was growing up, my mom used to teach us how to make Indian pemmican, which was also sort of one of these high density, high storage value foods. And now B and Chris, when they were on this morning, that was the first thing they wanted to put an eye to. They said, before I show this to the public, we want to make sure that it is reasonably at least fixable, if not do it right now before you go talk about it, to make sure that this will be hard to min-max. And the first thing they noticed is that I had put in, if you look at my inclusion of water, it's always this derived column that is in light gray that you might barely even be able to see what it is. And I had put it in light gray because I wasn't sure we'd want to do it as a game. I'm not sure we'd want to track it. I'm not sure we'd want to deal with it. Even though clearly in real life you need water more often than you need food, you'll die much faster of lack of water than lack of food. But I wasn't sure I wanted to sign the team up for it. And the first thing that B and Chris noticed is we have to. And the reason why they said we have to is because otherwise people will purposely look for dry food. They won't want to waste stomach volume content on water since it had no benefit. And so they said that's immediately a min-max that you had left in it when I first drafted it. And so we are, and so the way I presented it at DragonCon is I had said that protein, carbs, and fat were going to change your regeneration rates. Chris and B's advice is that we make these be more buffs that you have when you have them satiated and positive, and that a lack of water will steal all your regeneration rates. So you basically won't be able to recover as you are naturally damaged in life unless you are satiated with water. But the point is, that's where we're at right now on this process, is trying to make sure you can't min-max it. And I think it won't. I think it'll be fine because people's consumption rates are going to vary so much. If you're a fighter, you will burn through the protein faster, and so you will want to load protein faster. Now, if what you're saying is, will there be a way to optimally load protein? Could be. It's possible that beef jerky or whatever will be your best way to load protein, but we'll try to balance that against cost and when we started talking about things like elven bread or dungeon rations, we're going to make sure that we put an ingredient in here, like a healing potion, that is so expensive that the meta ingredient that will be the, wow, I'm just bruised up in battle, I need something, I don't even know if I need protein or carbs or whatever else, I just need some high density nutrition of all the above because I'm in desperate need. Well, then we'll make you one of those, but we'll make it so expensive, and or I didn't put alcohol back in this one, but like potions, if you add in an ingredient that has a cost associated with it, will dissuade people from using the shortcut. And so that's where we're at right now, is trying to work out those issues of min-maxing. Anyone else?
I have a bit of a question for role players, really. You mentioned being able to possibly put the maker's mark on an item. However, in a role play, restaurant, tavern, or whatever, some may like to have their foods branded and given a special name, such as the name of their establishment and this kind of. Is that going to be something that's going to be workable in there?
That is a great suggestion. Had not shown up in my list, but I'm going to put the note here: maker's marks versus establishment marks, and that's possible. What I don't think, so that one being a little flag that you could set, that do I want the maker's mark to be me, or do I want the maker's mark to be something about my establishment, my guild, or some piece of data we're already tracking so that we can assign it, as long as it's something we already have, like your family name or your guild name, then we could probably do it. If you were to make up something like saying, I'm going to call my place Fire Lotus's Tavern, but the game didn't already have a Fire Lotus's Tavern in the data set, you just kind of made it up, I'm not sure we'll be able to let people type in a name and assign it, because that would be a data flow problem. But it seems like it might be possible to put an establishment mark as long as that mark was an existing data set. I'll look into it, though. It's a good suggestion.
So another one that came up at DragonCon that I see coming up through chat, and I just wanted to mention, was what about all the things that we try that aren't recipes? How are you guys going to handle that? And I was hoping you'd spend a couple minutes and answer that.
Sure, of course. As you all may know, when you talk to an NPC in our world, everything you say to that NPC is logged. And each new release, Scott Jennings goes through those logs and looks for things that people are commonly asking players and tries to make them respond intelligently to that thing that they have been asked. And for example, one of the things that our NPCs are asked or offered the most is propositions. And so be aware, any of you that are propositioning the NPCs in the game, we know who you are and we know who you propositioned because that data is tracked. All the cuss words you say to them, we track. But the point of what we're looking for, though, by the way, is if you always go up to the guard and go, how do I get to the tavern? If that's the thing you always ask the guards, then we ought to make the guards smart enough to respond to that. Well, our recipe system will not allow you explicitly to, on your own, invent a recipe. We've not built an invention system of that particular type into at least release 1. I mean, it's a cool idea. We love the broad concept of that, but that's not what this game has in it. On the other hand, we do track what everybody attempts. And so if people are clearly, if what we see by common use of recipes, it's, oh, look, it's obvious people are trying to make an apple pie here by the stuff they put out on the cooking table and hit craft. But we'll look at those frequencies of attempts, and we can then respond and say, okay, it's obvious people would like to make a mincemeat pie or whatever it might be. And so we can respond that way. We can also respond just to direct requests. People go like, oh, I really want pumpkin pies. Well, I can go, okay, well, let me just go fix all the things I need to do to make pumpkin pies work. So we can put them in by direct interaction with you guys, the community. We can put them in there. But what we can also do, and what we have and plan to do, is put recipes in that we don't ever announce to people. And so by having recipes in the game that are just revealed by experimentation, or somebody data mining probably, it means that you can actually try. Yeah, exactly, you. And it means we can actually try to let them be discovered in a sense of invention or discovery, but it will really be because it already exists there to be discovered. And one thing that's different about how we're doing recipes than how we're going to do, say, some emotes, is that you can try any recipe as long as, I didn't even put in here these skill levels recipes might require to be able to pull off. So souffle might require more cooking skill than steak. But in theory, you can try basically any recipe, and it should work for you. The emotes we're going to do, and some other kinds of skills we're going to do differently than that. Some of them will have to be taught to you by someone else who actually literally knows it. And in theory, we could do this with some advanced cooking if we thought it was important, because we'll already have that type of system. But for example, if I know, I don't know if you remember the Adventurers Club at Disney, Kungaloosh, this salute that used to be at the Adventurers Club in Disney. If I know that salute and you don't, just seeing me do it may not be enough for you to then go do it. It might require you to come up to me and say, hey, teach me the Adventurers Club salute. To which I might go, sure, I'm happy to do so. How about $5? And that way the economy gets involved in the free market spreading of that community institutional knowledge. And it's not just by looking it up on the internet. In this case, it would be by actually training each other and passing it around. And that way, when we introduce new emotes, we just teach one person, or maybe two, but one's probably enough. And pass it on to any of our good community leaders and let it spread.
I've got a question if you have a moment still.
Absolutely, please.
The thing that I kind of like as I think about this is the idea of a player restaurant where you have people who are very, very skilled at cooking, and this is what they do. Just an idea. Assuming that you had magic to do it, or the place that they were running this restaurant had power of some sort, what about a storage device which is a refrigerator?
Very interesting idea. I don't see why not. I'm now making a note of that because we do have power in the game. The big cities have wind power, water power, geothermal power. We have Avatar's radios that are going to go in throughout the world here shortly. And so I think that's an outstanding concept, and I'll talk to Chris and others about it. It seems to me it'd be pretty easy. You just put the food in stasis or run its half-life down by half, while it's in the refrigerator. It should be an ice cellar even in medieval times, Ria says, too. Yeah, I agree. Good idea. Look at it.
I would love to see some form of gold sink associated with operating that type of equipment in the game, so it doesn't offset the initial intent of the sink of age. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. I agree with that, too. And the reason why you would want to refrigerate things and spend that gold on them is because those are rare ingredients. I mean, if it was a cheap, free, year-round resource, you might be happy to let it rot if it's that cheap and that plentiful. But if it's the mushrooms that you pick that are only seasonal and only right after a rain that have magic properties, you're going like, dude, it was so hard to get those truffles, whatever it might be, that I'd rather keep these in the refrigerator because it was a pain in the ass to have got them in the first place.
Yeah, the idea would be for it to be somewhat rare. You know what I mean?
Agreed. But again, you guys are totally getting the power of this basic structure. Going back to those restaurants you were talking about, imagine now a restaurant, when you come in, as opposed to me saying, look, which would you like to have, the red plate or the blue plate, which are really the same plate because it's irrelevant, you now can come in and say, ah, good sirs, I see you and your friends are a bunch of brawny fighters. Well, I have just the thing for you. Today, why don't I offer you the shepherd's pie and stew, because it's got plenty of protein for you warriors. And oh, look, a mage has joined us. Welcome, good sir or ma'am. Let me tell you the concoctions we have that'll be proper for you. And the person can say, no, you understand. I'm not just a mage. I'm a paladin, really. So I really need the protein and the carbohydrates. But please, tell me what you have that fits my particular needs as a player. And anyway, I think that we've taken food from literally just a placeholder to something that I think has the potential to generate a broader type of interest.
Once again, with the systems all impacting each other, you could even go into things that says certain reagents needing to be refrigerated and having that shelf life for different spells or something like that. So you might get a hold of your person that actually has an ice cellar or whatever it may be to store some of your reagents.
Well, in fact, a way to make it the ice cellar versus a refrigerator, refrigerator with power would be great. But also, we have basements. So a basement that we could sell is the ice cellar. It's still likely magically there. I'm not. Well, maybe we could. I saw somebody in the chat room say ice economy. We're going to have those control point passes through the mountains. So maybe we make another mineable thing, which is block of ice. Give it a short half-life, and it's now just an ingredient like anything else. It's a block of ice. So you mine your blocks of ice. They have a short window of time until you get them back into town. And then you better put them in the ice cellar, at which point in time they go back to lasting a long time, and you have an ice cellar. I like it. Yes. Ice cellars and mining ice. Anyway,
A couple of things I just wanted to toss out there. I did create a forum where people can share their favorite recipes. And definitely feel free to actually share real recipes, because I love to cook and I'd love to try them. And also, I also wanted to let us know that we are about at 1 hour and 30 minutes, give or take a few minutes. So just wanted to throw that out there.
So first of all, I appreciate everybody hanging with me an hour and a half. We usually try to do these for an hour only, just to make sure people can get back to their other aspects of real life. And but also, I'm doing okay on time. So let's take a few more questions here, and we'll just see if we get close to filling everybody's needs or quandaries.
I have one question, if I may, from the community, and it's very fitting that this one comes in from Spoon. You were discussing different types of seasonal foods. However, Spoon would like to know about regional foods, say the different regions of the world. Is there going to be something working with that, so we know what region they're from, what recipes they will make?
Yes, regional food. I'm also marking this one down because this one is not as well done as it could and should be based on that question. I think it's, again, an excellent idea. We had talked about regional. There is currently regional ingredients, mostly based on terrain types, though. So, for example, you have to go into the swamps to find certain things. You have to go into the swamps during certain weather and certain lunar or astronomical moments. That sort of thing is in the game, is in this plan. What is not in this plan at the moment is to say, that the best saffron, comes from the Valhold region to the northwest. or all of the saffron comes from the Northwest. That's not in there yet, but I think it's a great idea to say both for natural and perhaps growing. And the reason why to do it both natural and growing is that means that if you build your house closer to the equator, maybe the coconuts are a great thing for you to grow. But if you go all the way up to Valhold, which is more of kind of a Norse environment, maybe the coconut trees really aren't the best thing to plant. Maybe they're less productive while they're up there. So anyway, I think it's an interesting idea that we'll look into.
So I had one about the comments you made on burn rates and ratios. So as someone who's always played kind of a death cleric type character, I'm going to be needing to balance my food to where I have both the strength and the magic ability, the focus, okay? And you had mentioned while using that you'd burn through it faster. I'm curious what the benefit to somebody like me who's going to hybrid out and going to use both sides of the game so heavily. It seems like I might be almost penalized on the food system because I'm going to be burning the proteins and the carbs. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think you're going to be fine because as you burn them, it will also you'll when you cast any individual or use any individual skill, if it's a weapon skill, it'll burn a little more protein. If it's a magic skill, it'll burn a little more focus. So what that just means is when you go into the town or make yourself a meal, you'll want yours to be more balanced versus loaded fully on one side or the other. I think your burn rate, we'll have to see. I mean, my anticipation is your burn rate will be half as much on either side, so you can balance that out. But by the way, if it ended up penalizing you for multi-classing, I'm not sure if it became harder to multi-class because you had to manage that a little tighter. I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm also not sure that even if it did happen, whether that's necessarily a bad thing, because it's not. These are not meant to be blockers. These are buffs. You will, by managing food correctly, you'll have basically a buff. The only one that you really better watch is keep the water satiated, or your auto heals will drop off, which again is really technically a buff because you can still heal yourself. And so these are all sort of ways to optimize your play, not demands of you to play. If you never cook or eat a single piece of food, you should be able to get through the game just fine. But if you're trying to really optimize, you'll want to stay well fed.
That kind of goes into the ratio thing that I was curious about is how heavy of a burden is it going to be if we do run out in the middle of combat. If I'm in the middle of a quest while I'm, 2 hours into this play sequence and I've noticed that all of my regeneration has fallen away, it's not going to stop me from completing it then. It just will make it harder. That's the goal?
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And the only side effect we begin to talk a little bit more about this is, and this actually comes from the Vengeance folks and their battles they were having out on the seafront in the last couple of releases. We noticed the power of healing potions, and that fed into what we discussed at DragonCon, which was let's add a little alcohol into those potions. So that if you drink 2 or 3 of those potions, you're going to start getting dizzy and pay that price. And if you add to that also just a volume problem of you overeat, then you now really put a limit to that. And so we're trying to make sure that there are certain activities that if you really want to do them, you really shouldn't be in combat. You really need to go find a place off by yourself that no one's going to throttle you, to sit down and pull out your backpack, set up, get out your knife and fork and sausage or whatever it might be, and and do things in a less interrupt problematic circumstance. Jared, did you have a question?
Oh, well, it's a question from, I think, Sir Barrels, which added to a second one that I wanted to ask about. It was, how much information do you get about food that you buy, like when does it expire? Which adds another question, will your skill at cooking allow you to more accurately assess how long a particular food or ingredient is going to last? Or is that information hidden, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that came up once with the team, but we didn't resolve it. Um, uh, which is important that if I get an apple and I sell it to a kiosk, and then somebody else goes and buys it from that kiosk, does it have the freshness of the apple at the time that I picked it off the tree, which it probably should? And if that's the case, how does the player know if I buy apple A versus buy apple B, which one is going to last longer, and is there a skill that helps me refine that? And the shorter answer is that's the correct question to which we do not yet have a correct answer. It did come up. I think it's solvable. I don't think we'd want them to reset to completely fresh at the time you buy it, which would at least be consistent for buying. But it would also mean that you could game the system by taking an almost rotted apple, sell it to a shopkeeper, buy it back, and ta-da, it's fresh again. And we'll figure out the right answer there that's also simple code-wise, but it's a correct question. Jeannie, you got any from the forums or anywhere else you want to pop in?
Right now we're talking in the actual chat room. They're discussing sickness and disease. Like, can you actually suffer from eating bad food or spoiled food? And that kind of ties into one I saw go by earlier that says if you fail at a cooking recipe, does that give that particular item that detriment?
Yeah, and we've talked about that too, but we haven't. We don't have a resolved position, which is, by the way, another thing we haven't done yet on the systems of the game is talk about whether disease in general is communicable from person to person, or flame effects. I'm of the opinion that if someone has done a damage over time on me that is fire, then it might be fun to whereas I go run through other people or characters in the game that they also catch fire just because it's fun. And similarly with disease, should we have smallpox or some other, not poison but disease that is communicable? So that's a separate issue that we're at least talking about. I don't know what we'll do on that, or if we have time for it, or if it's critical for this first pass. But at least we're pondering it. But similarly, do we want to have food that can cause you problems? And the answer is yes. Don't forget, we do know the spoilage, the expiration date of food. We could let spoiled food not disappear from your inventory until maybe till you throw it away. But at the very least, we could wait till a week after it's actually fully spoiled to give you the chance, give you the opportunity, if you wish, to accidentally or purposely eat it first. If you don't examine the apple before you shove it in your mouth, oh shit, that one was spoiled. We could do that, but we haven't. That part has not been designed yet. I will explore it with the team.
I actually want to bring something up out of chat to the right here about communicable diseases. We had talked a little bit about some stuff at DragonCon with abilities that would only be usable inside of open PvP zones. Maybe you guys make the communicable diseases only occur in open PvP zones. So if somebody wants to go and grief you by giving you a disease, you have an opportunity to kill them first and keep them at bay. But then also that could be a way to attack a city, is try to sneak in while you have this really bad case of such and such and give somebody a hug. And yeah.
As long as it was a PvP city, that would be fair. Yeah. So that's a good idea, and again, we haven't done any communicable diseases, but you are bringing up valid and I think correct design points for that system. Should we get to it? Mm-hmm.
So I do know a question that I don't remember actually being covered, but I've seen it in several places, including the website and the chat room. Is players are interested in knowing, is there going to be a way outside of, say, submitting it, but for them to actually input their own recipes into the game, create their own original combinations of food?
I think that unfortunately at the moment we won't be able to expose the recipe maker to people, and the reasons are multifold. Amongst the reasons we couldn't, though, is that the recipe would have to have agreement with our underlying economics as to what went in and came out. In other words, if you try to make an apple pie recipe that only required water, then you could generate value to players out of water, and that wouldn't be fair. So ultimately, we have to approve of every recipe that goes into the game. And so I think that the closest we'll get to that will be that you submit, perhaps through the thread that Gina has put up, ideas so that we can balance them into the game. You know, I've already had to go through the ones I've done too and go, I have to either use the ingredients that exist, or I have to invent ingredients to exist for the recipe. And sometimes the right thing to do could be either way. And so having control of them on the in-house lets us balance all those factors together. All right. Well, in that case, since you know we've made an hour and 45 minutes, and I think that's pretty good. I by the way have really enjoyed this. I've got a page full of notes that I've gotten from all of you that were great, and whether that's you know, the cost to overeat, canning recipes, honey used as antibiotics, cooking on campfires, whether you process food while you're offline. Being over or undernourished to affect your body morphology, rodents if you don't clean your house, mugs versus wineskins per use so you can drink on the fly, you know, maker's marks versus establishment's marks, refrigerators or ice cellars being a gold sink and also perhaps creating a mining for ice, regional foods for even for both growing and naturally, freshness at the time you buy from a shop, and going to spoilage, not spillage, spoilage, and a disease associated with eating and communicability. Those are all great things that we will go look at now. And again, all the stuff I've shown you is already literally, you know, a week from Monday when I get to Austin, B and I are going to sit down and put this group in. They're not promising it for release 10, by the way. I've been trying to push them into release 10. They've got other things pretty high on their priority plate for release 10. But I told them I was going to enter this data myself without them, and that made them go, stop, 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 stop. We'll sit down with you to put these in, Richard. And so they made a couple of days set aside for me out of their schedule so that we could put them in together. So who knows? If some of these might, or some product of this might make it to release 10, but it's not officially on the plan for release 10. But by release 11, whatever we do here should all should all come to pass, or at least some form of it. As you know, as always, you know, don't lawyer us. These are the ideas of where we're headed. We think this is pretty close to what will go in, but as we implement it, we'll probably discover a few more holes that we need to fill, or have some new ideas that we think might improve it. So it may change a bit. But thank you very much.
I actually, right before we close out, if I could add another idea.
Sure.
Amber had suggested something for roleplay earlier that got turned into kind of subtitling, and I kind of had a concept that would give you the ability to kind of expand on that process to where you don't just put a maker's mark on, but maybe slot a text field that you can save to an item for lore. So when you go to inspect that item, you know how everything has its own history, you get something that you can enter a very short name to, and that gives you the ability to then say, this is the XYZ shepherd's pie, or this is the ABC shepherd's pie. You know, a very, very short title field that is inspected to be found, or whatever it may be, so it doesn't change the UI or the icon information, but it's still inside of a database that doesn't break the information flow. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Here is how I would articulate that back to you in a way that it might be possible in the game. And I'm sure Chris and B, who are either watching or will watch this on recording, are rolling over and screaming at me now, just even talking anything like this. But hypothetically, what I don't think we want to do is open up literally the way you described it. Just open up a text field and let me type. That you then have to go, what data structure does it become part of? But it turns out we do have a data structure that allows you to type. And that data structure is books and parchment sheets. So it might be possible for us to have a skill or a process, a scribing process, that basically says, I want to attach this piece of parchment to this object, just like you would attach your coat of arms or something. And so at the very least, it may be possible we can say, look, I've made the batch of this stew, or maybe this cask of wine that is, Fraser's Folly Ale or whatever it might be, and so now I'm going to slap a label on it, basically, by attaching a piece of parchment to it, and that piece of parchment had text on it. So,
I love it. I think that's perfect. And it gives you the cost associated with labeling it as well, because you use up the piece of parchment.
Right, and so if you call it a labeling system, and by the way, that label then would become a free floater when you broke down the cask, when you use the cask and make it glasses of wine. It should probably then delink the parchment, if you know what I mean. So the parchment becomes a floater at that point, something like that. So there's a hypothetical, and again, these are all great ideas. And even things like rodents if you don't clean up your kitchen, if we don't get to them in episode 1, we'll keep this list around to kind of crank through these fun ideas for expansions.
Okay, I have a last little one question from Jinx, which is really a basic question. Do you have to sit down for eating, or can we eat on the fly?
Good question. Since you can't eat it all right now, that is a darn good question. In previous Ultima games, you could always eat on the fly. Just double-click on the food and eat it up. So I imagine that will still be the case, that you should be able to stand up or be technically running at the time you eat. I just don't think you'll be able to invoke a recipe while you're on the run. You'll have to stop and go to your cook stove or kitchen stove, a camp stove or kitchen stove, to invoke the recipe. But I don't see any reason why you should be prevented from eating on the fly.
One big thing, if I could add in, would maybe just possibly be that depending on what you're eating. If you're eating a piece of beef jerky, you could be running. But if you want to eat a full-on steak with, this and that sides, then you probably would have to sit down and eat that.
Yeah, and that could be possible, but then you'd have to go based on what, when I imagine somebody putting out the turkey dinner, I imagine, there'll be a bowl of cranberry sauce, a plate of slices of turkey, a bread roll on a side bread plate, a goblet full of wine. And so in my mind, those 4 items, you click on them and they turn into empty bowl, empty plate, empty goblet as you consume them. In theory, you could have put those 4 plates in your inventory if we allow you to do it at all. You could also have them in your backpack, running around with them, and you click on them one at a time and eat them. So by default, I still think it's hard to say, can I eat this bowl of, is this thing in a bowl of cranberries suddenly the thing that pins me to sitting down or not? And and maybe that's true. Maybe things on a plate or in a bowl you have to sit down, and things that don't need a plate or a bowl, like a turkey leg or a piece of beef jerky, you don't have to sit down. Could be. Okay, thinking out loud. I've switched sides. I'll items in plates, bowls.
I like it.
Glasses must sit to eat. Maybe. Okay. We'll look into it, see what falls out, but that's not a bad concept. All right. Well, we're now at basically the close of hour 2. So, Gina, I will leave it to you to do the final closing, but I at least want to say thank you to everybody. Congratulations to Kenneth and Jared for their formal indoctrination into the order. May I also thank you, some of our most valued community leaders who are with us here today. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for being a part of this community. For all of those of you in the chat room, by no means do I mean to say that you are not equally valuable members of our community. And I hope to get all of you cycled through to get a chance to be live with us on future chats, as you may be interested in participating. But absolutely, thank you all so much, everyone who's watching now in the chat room or the broadcast, or might watch it on re-recording. Thanks for showing interest. Thanks for being a backer. Thanks for joining us on this journey. It is a pleasure and an honor to be on the building side of this to help try to make this the best possible experience for all of you. Thank you. And then over to you, Gina, for the final word.
And I want to take a moment also to thank this community and this team of developers who have made it possible for me as a community manager to combine the two favorite parts of my job, which is getting the community ideas to the developers and having the developers really interact with the community, which is something that is amazingly new in gaming, and I think it's an amazing process, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of that and to help facilitate that. I know some people had asked me, how do I get involved in something like this? How do I get chosen to come on and hang out live on the air? And the simple answer to that is I read the forums, and so I went through the forums and I checked out who was talking about all this good stuff, who was really interested in consumables and food and cooking and crafting, and so I put out my invitation, so to speak. I asked some people if they would be interested based on their interest. So if you're interested in a topic, if you have feedback and ideas, make sure you get on the forums and share that, because that's something that I'm looking at when I'm sitting down to put together these Hangouts. To see who's going to get the most out of and who's going to have the most feedback live as well. So definitely I do read the forums, and not just in a bad way. So make sure if you have something you're passionate about, share your ideas. It does matter. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for hanging out with us for 2 hours. We have had a record number of viewers that stayed for the whole thing, so that's awesome. And thank you for everyone who watches this once it's already put back up as a recording. Share your recipes in that new forum. Share your ideas. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Have a great one.